Well, good evening and welcome everybody to tonight's program. My name is David Brashear. I'm the director of the Muscarelle Museum of Art, and we are pleased to be bringing you two outstanding individuals for our program tonight. Before we get started, I wanted to just go through a few announcements, as I always do. Thank you for bearing with me. Remembering, if you're not a member, we'd love to have you join us. You can find out more about membership at www.muscarelle.org. We do have a number of remaining events this spring, and I hope you'll be back to join us for some of them. Of course, every spring we run selected topics in architecture, our lecture series on the topic of architecture, and we have two excellent events still on the calendar, and we hope you'll join us for them. Joe Lord will be talking on April 13th about the making and meaning of the international style and reflecting back on MoMA's groundbreaking and game-changing 1932 exhibition. And then I'll be back on May 25th to talk about the architecture of transportation in Washington, D.C., and we'll specifically focus in on some of the modern marvels, the Metro, Dulles Airport, and then the recent renovations to National Airport. Well, as you know, each semester we do a deep dive into a topic, and this spring we are focusing in on the impact of art and architecture and the built environment on healing and the psychology of healing. This spring, Muscarelle Explorations is sponsored by our friends at the Williamsburg Landing, and we thank them for their support. So we do still have a few events, and I want to make sure you have them on your calendar. We have one remaining art therapy workshop led by David Brashear, and that's on April 16th, virtual, of course, beginning at noon. That's an afternoon session. We have an incredible lecture on April 22nd with Michael Arid, who was the architect of the reflecting pools at the September 11th Memorial in downtown Manhattan. And he'll talk about his experience and what brought him to that design. So I hope you'll sign up and join us for that. And then, of course, tonight. I think you're going to find tonight's program compelling in many, many ways. And if during the course of our discussion you have a question you'd like to ask, please post it in the Q&A or the chat functions of Zoom, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So there are few places that so effectively meet the parameters of our Healing by Design theme of this spring's Muscarelle Exploration Series, as does the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington. This week, we've invited our museum patrons to screen the film, The Healing Wall, and tonight we have the privilege to be speaking with Jan Scruggs, the Vietnam veteran who, through determination and persistence, essentially brought the memorial into being. And we're also joined by Chris Kosinski, the filmmaker of the Healing Wall documentary. So just a little bit about each of these two gentlemen. In 1979, Jan Scruggs conceived the idea of building the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. as a tribute to all who served during what was one of the longest wars in American history. And today, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is among the most visited memorials in the nation's capital. Jan was a wounded and decorated veteran of the Vietnam War, having served in the 199th Light Infantry Brigade of the U.S. Army. He felt a memorial would serve as a healing device for a different kind of wound that inflicted on our national psyche by the long and controversial Asian War. Jan launched the effort with $2,800 of his own money and gradually gained the support of other Vietnam veterans in persuading Congress to provide what would be a prominent location on federal government property somewhere in Washington, D.C. And so after a difficult struggle, a lot of fights, Congress responded, and the site was chosen on the National Mall near the Lincoln Memorial, and I know many of you have been there. As president of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, the nonprofit organization created to build and maintain that memorial, Jan headed up that effort and raised $8.4 million, and then saw the memorial completed in remarkably just 2 years. It was dedicated on November 13th, 1982, during what was a week-long national salute to Vietnam veterans in the nation's capital. He has appeared on 60 Minutes, Nightline, Good Morning America, The Today Show, and also on C-SPAN, CNN, and Fox. He's written opinion articles for the Washington Post, USA Today, the New York Times, the Washington Times, and many other national and regional publications. He is a national speaker and author, and he's written articles on a wide range of topics. He's a native of Washington, D.C. He grew up in Bowie, Maryland, and received his bachelor's and master's degrees from American University in Washington and his law degree from the University of Maryland, Baltimore. Chris Kosinski is a regional, national, and internationally recognized broadcast producer, director, and editor, and he hails from South Bend, Indiana, but now resides in Los Angeles. He graduated in 2013 from Ball State University with a bachelor's degree in film and television production, and also a minor in marketing. In 2015, he went on and received his master's degree from Ball State University in telecommunications, digital storytelling, and broadcast production. In 2014, his film, which we've been screening this week, The Healing Wall, premiered at the Heartland Film Festival, was featured on PBS, and received 4 regional Emmy nominations for these categories: Best Documentary, Directing, Editing, and Sound Design. And then, in addition to the success of The Healing Wall, he also received another Emmy nomination that year for his work as executive producer on the historical documentary, A Legacy Etched in Glass. After a variety of compelling assignments with a wide range of international clients, serving as a designer and producer of story-based commercials, Chris is now a creative producer for Amazon. So I hope you all join me in welcoming Jan Scruggs and Chris Kosinski to the Muscarelle Museum. And so, Jan, I'd like to start with you. What drove you to the idea for a memorial for the Vietnam veterans? And perhaps you could tell us how a Vietnam Veterans Memorial is different from a Vietnam War Memorial. So I'll turn it over to you, and welcome.
Well, the story begins when I was in the 12th grade in high school, and I had nothing ahead of me. So I figured, why don't I just go in the Army, and I'll get drafted anyway. So I volunteered for the draft. I was trained as an infantryman, and saw a fair amount of combat in Vietnam. I was very seriously wounded, decorated for gallantry. And going to war is something that kind of sticks with you. You see a lot of trauma, and I became very much involved in doing a lot of the wrong thing, motorcycles, and kind of racing cane. And but finally, got down and started studying. I went to American University, got a master's degree, and became a nationally recognized expert on what is now called post-traumatic stress disorder or post-traumatic stress. And I looked at the military veterans and compared different variables like the trust in people, trust in government, marriage, divorce rates, and compared them to see people who saw little combat, medium combat, and heavy combat. And the people who saw the more heavy combat, the more trauma, had more problems. Kind of nothing much there, but at least it was something. It started more research, and Congress finally passed the Vet Center bill. And now there are vet centers in every major city and small towns in the United States where veterans come, not so much from Vietnam anymore, but now from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Korea. And even there aren't many World War II veterans, but when Saving Private Ryan came out. Many of them went to these vet centers. So I decided, look, I'm going to do this. My wife and I went to see the movie The Deer Hunter. It impacted on me greatly, and I stayed up all night. And I told her I'm going to build a national Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and the probability of success was about zero. I came up with $2,800, which is my father left me when he died, and I hired a lawyer and started this crusade. And it was kind of like, I'm on a mission from God. It was Dan Aykroyd. I have to do this. There was a spiritual calling. I have to get the names up. And that's the crucial fact of the memorial. Everybody who entered the design competition had to have the names on the memorial. And so it ended up being a major national controversy involving the White House, involving the National Security Council, involving the majority leader of the House and Senate, because the legacy, the narrative of the Vietnam War was the issue. People on the far right, these Vietnam veteran guys on the right, they wanted a memorial that would say the war was right, therefore the veterans were right. Our mantra was separate the war from the warrior. We're here to show appreciation to the military combatants who defended America in Vietnam, and we're not taking any position on the war. And that's where the things get murky, because the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, designed by Maya Ying Lin, is black, was called the Black Gash of Shame and Sorrow. Why are all the monuments white? This one's black. You know, we fought with all kinds of very powerful people who had unlimited financial backing from a fellow named H. Ross Perot, by the way. And we broke even. We finally broke ground. Once we broke ground, there was no stopping the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And then it began to evolve into something much bigger, with hundreds of thousands of items that have been left at the wall. So, long story short.
Sorry about that. I had a helicopter flying over my office, so I muted myself for a second. Can you just speak a little bit more about the names and why the names were so important?
Yes, there's nothing that unique about a memorial with names. It's a fairly common device. But the feeling was, my theory was, that this was tied into the thinking of Carl Jung. Carl Jung was a student of Sigmund Freud, and he talked about societal archetypes. And the societal archetype that every culture has is always the man who was wounded or killed fighting for his country. You know, everybody feels something for him. So by making the names the central element, I figured this will quell any controversy. Well, I mean, that's how naive I was, but it did work because nobody really wanted to come out against it. It did hold back the ocean of fighting against this memorial for enough time for us to get it through the commissions. And so it had to be done.
Well, that's great. Chris, you were a graduate student at Ball State when you made this documentary. Can you give us a little bit of background about what brought you to this subject? Why was it something important to you? And also, why was it a relevant project within the environment of Ball State? You have many speakers from Ball State on the documentary.
Yes. And first, I'd like to say thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here today and have this opportunity. During that time, you know, I did my undergrad there, and then I was in graduate school there, and I had this opportunity to work on an app. It was going to be for students where they would be able to go around the wall, and they'd be able to use the app to learn different parts about the history of how it was made, because as you know, it's quite compelling with all the things that happened to get this memorial made. And so as we kept doing research, it was myself and 4 undergraduates, and then 1 other grad student who was my director of photography. His name's Shane. And And, you know, we started at, so it was a really small crew, and they were actually quite green besides Shane as far as like experience, but, you know, they were all very determined. And I think that was and very passionate about it. And I think that was really important at the time. And so as we were doing research, I started looking at it and I said to myself, there's something much more here, you know, and we need to make a documentary. I didn't want to just make all these small videos, and the app was wonderful, right? It was for students, but I wanted to make something that could be even greater. Not to say that the app wasn't great, but I wanted to be able to tell the full story in the way that I thought it needed to be told. The reason why it was through Ball State, and there's so many people involved with Ball State, is because the class was actually in architecture, the architecture building, and it was a landscape architecture class. But they had brought film students in for the content for the app. And one of the professors was Carla Corbin, who was part of Cooper Lecky, and who helped create the memorial. And so she had a lot of connections. And then she connected us with JC, was able to connect us with Jan. And, you know, I mentioned the other day, it's just, you know, listening to Jan's words and his stories, and quite frankly, everybody in that video, but specifically Jan's, it was just a very incredible experience. Not as incredible as the actual memorial itself. It's quite cathartic, but that's really why we had so many Ball State people there. And Alan Dotson, he's a professor there, but I think he had a fantastic perspective on the memorial as well. So I think it all just kind of worked out, because knowing how determined I was to make the right documentary, if people weren't able to give us the content that we need and to tell the story that we need, I would have reached out even further. But I felt like the people that we had to be a commentary for this story really did the job very well, you know.
I have to agree. I think it just amazed me that so many people had such a deep perspective on what had happened at the memorial and in the process, and there they all were at Ball State. But I would have to agree with you wholeheartedly. And I would say also, being a university art museum, we are very much endeared when we hear about professors helping to connect students so that students can do great work. So thank you for sharing that. Well, Jan, you eventually held an architectural competition and received over 1,400 entries. And I myself have been a member of architectural selection committees. And in my experience, there are often several, if not many, excellent entries. So can you tell us a little bit about what the guidelines were for the competition? What were you asking for from the entrants?
Yes, the important thing was that each participant in the competition find a way to display the names, and that it be a landscape solution that would be harmonious with the environment. So we use words like that to try to paint a picture of what we wanted, although we weren't sure, no one knew. And I always felt, as I said to Mr. Paul Spryregan, who was our manager of the competition, I said, look, you can't tell me that we can have 1,400 entrants and that you can't have 20 that would be as good as the other. And he said, that's where you're wrong, Jim. There will be one that will sail beyond all the others. And that was designed by Maya Ying.
Interesting.
And, yeah, fantastic. And, you know, he really was right. There certainly were 10, 15, 20, which would have been, you know, good solid B minus, C plus, you know, maybe almost a B plus. But there was only one that was a perfect 10. And that was designed by Maya England, which was also the least expensive to build. I mean, these other ones, one of them had a huge American flag with walking on the stripes, and there was water and microphones talking to the names. So this was also the largest architectural design competition held in the history of Western civilization. That's a fact. Surpassed only recently by the fellow who's going to be on your show next week, the Israeli guy who designed the 9/11 memorial. But reflective and contemplative. Contemplative. We want a memorial that's reflective and contemplative. She met that, you know, unlike the other ones. The most common one was a miniature Lincoln Memorial mausoleum sort of thing.
Right. And I would suspect she was a young student at that time. I'm sure you were getting entries from very seasoned architects and likely from groups of architects at firms. How was her presentation in comparison to some of the other entries that were received?
Well, she used watercolors, and it was very difficult for the untrained eye to understand it or to understand the beauty of black granite. I mean, she just had kind of, you know, black watercolor paint, but black granite, when you polish it, it shines and you can almost shave at it. And so you see your picture as you're looking at the names of the casualties. So an absolutely fantastic idea. As well, Maya Lin's idea was to make it like yin and yang. The beginning and the end will meet in the center of the memorial. So people are on the memorial in the order that they died, that they gave their life. And the final name, Richard Van de Geer, is on the bottom panel to your left as you're at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. But that has been such a brilliant thing for the military veterans who come there, and they were in a battle and maybe they lost 8 or 10 of their buddies, but they're all right next to each other on the wall, alphabetized by day, but still absolutely brilliant.
Interesting. You know, that reflective device really is an engagement capability that you don't really find in many memorials. Chris, Maya Lin's design, selected for the memorial, but she's not really an active part of your documentary. Why is that?
Yes, we wanted to tell her story, of course, but there already was a documentary, A Strong, Clear Vision, about Maya Lin in the memorial. So we wanted to tell the story of the veterans. And that's really one of the main inspirations when I said there is a greater story here, because I felt like that story had not been told. And at that time, I was very compelled with all my research and like storytelling to about Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, which is a 17-stage hero's journey. And in many ways, if anybody ever wants to, it's pretty complex, but if anybody ever wants to look at it, it's quite reflective of our own lives as human beings in the cycle of life. But one of the biggest things about it is the 3 main steps, which is separation, initiation, and return. Where a hero is separated from their old world, they go into a new world, they're initiated in that new world, and they always return to the old world a changed hero. And so how I wanted to use that concept to tell the veteran's story was the veterans separate themselves from their preconceived ideas of what the memorial is, a black hole in the ground, calling it a V shape instead of a chevron shape, and all those negative misconceptions that many have. By visiting the memorial, and you know, they have quite great testimonials, in my opinion, of how they felt throughout the film, and they're initiated in that new world by its therapeutic designs of landscape architecture. And then, of course, they return to their old world, a changed hero, a changed person with a new perspective. And I think that's one of the most important things about this memorial and why it means so much to me, is because for me, it's about a change in perspective. And, you know, you could even have a good understanding or feel like you have a good understanding or try to understand a little bit, but going down into that memorial, into that rift in the earth, which Maya Lin mentioned, it's quite poetic the way she said it. I think that gives people the opportunity to truly find a new perspective and discover things that they never thought that they knew. And the memorial, it means a lot to me. I will say that.
You know, it's interesting that you focused in on that experience. I can tell you, I remember the press as we were leading up to the opening of the memorial as being on both sides of the fence, right? As you know, some as sharp critics, what is this kind of monument doing on the landscape of the National Mall, and others in support. But there were a lot of negative voices, and I remember having sort of a negative preconceived notion as I went to see it. I had to go see this monstrosity, and you get there and it is absolutely transformational, right? So you walk down through it and it just begins to envelop you and consume you. And I think for anybody, it's an emotional experience. And at that moment in time, it was so new and fresh that it absolutely sort of pulled at you in ways you never expected. And then once you're all the way down at the V, looking up at those tall panels of granite and seeing all the names, it just, you're moved in a way that you don't expect to be moved. And you have an understanding in a way that you really didn't expect to understand. You know, and I think there's a little bit of that here. Jen, you have degrees in psychology. And, you know, I'm sort of describing my own personal experience, but can you situate post-traumatic stress disorder a little bit more within your conception, your idea for the memorial, and maybe speak to a little bit how, in your experience, how the memorial affected you when you saw it first in person?
Yeah. Well, first of all, people have post-traumatic disorder, not only people who go to wars, but people who are victims of violence, of sexual violence. You know, people, nowadays you have these people running around shooting people in grocery stores and so forth. The people who survive this actually changes your brain when you have that kind of massive assault on it. And it makes many people go into depression. Sometimes some of these guys who came back from Vietnam and more recent wars as well, I mean, they're 22, 23 years old, consumed by this post-traumatic stress disorder. And I myself had it. I mean, that's why I assumed I wasn't the only person who had it. And it's a fairly common disorder. So a person with PTSD comes to see the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and he's walking down there, and then he gets to his panel where his buddies are, and he's transported back in time, almost like a time machine, as he looks at the names and remembers the terrible deaths that happened to them. But he can touch the name and make peace with the past. It doesn't magically happen for everybody who does it, but it really does happen for most people who can get there. And I just got a message the other day from the Vietnam veteran who said, I still can't go there. And a few years ago, I took a guy to see the Vietnam Veterans Memorial who lived on 23rd Street, 4 blocks away from the memorial for 34 years and had not come to see it. Other people fly from Alaska to see the Vietnam Wall or to volunteer there.
Yeah, that's so great. What about, you know, there's the wall and then there is the statue.
Yes.
At the entrance to the wall. Can you just explain a little bit about how that all came to be?
Yes. You know, one thing we do well, or used to do well in Washington, was find a way to compromise with people who disagree with you. And this memorial was avant-garde. I mean, let's face it, you know, I was expecting, you know, an obelisk or, you know, a statue with, like Iwo Jima, with a round pedestal with the names engraved. So this was a little too much for people. And we decided to try to make a compromise, and with the help of a fellow named John W. Warner, the former senator from the great state of Virginia.
Yes.
Got everyone together and we yelled at each other for several hours. And then finally, General Michael S. Davison, Commandant of West Point, stood up and said, "Gentlemen, I've listened to all these arguments, and we need a compromise. This is a avant-garde memorial. How about something traditional? Let's put a statue of the American fighting man there, red, white, and blue, patriotic." And everybody at that time was so tired, a compromise sounded like a great thing. So it's a beautiful statue. Frederick Hart, definitely the finest American sculptor of the 20th century. I mean, really, no exaggeration. There may be two or three like him, but for making figurative sculpture, he's brilliant. But he has the statue making eye contact with the memorial, as if they're looking to see if their own names are on it.
Interesting. Chris, one of the things I found especially moving in your documentary was the recitation of some of the mistreatment received by veterans when they returned to America. And I'm just wondering, what kind of an impact were you aiming for in describing that mistreatment?
I would say this. I spent a lot of time with veterans trying to understand. I'll never fully understand, and that's the stone cold truth. But I've had very tearful conversations with veterans where they've broken down, and how Jan was mentioning how some have never visited the memorial. One of those veterans in the film still has not, and I've been still trying to get him to go to this day. And unfortunately, you know, I really want to make sure that he gets to go out to that memorial before it's too late, because unfortunately some of the veterans that are in the film have passed away, that I've found out. But really what I wanted to do is try and get people to understand what it might have been like, especially younger people as well. And this is how I kind of feel about it. Is I just imagine, and maybe I'm wrong, but this is how I interpret it, is, you know, being a young man or woman getting drafted to a war that you might not have wanted to serve in, and going there, making friends or bringing friends with you, potentially losing those friends in combat, and then the idea of maybe the fact of like those relationships and how they could have progressed throughout life, or how that person could have lived, how they could have maybe had a family, the great things that they would have achieved throughout their lives. But it was all cut short that early. Sorry, I get a little emotional. But you know, not only that pain, but the pain of coming back, and not like World War II where it's a ticker tape parade, but having all of that packed into the fact that you're being mistreated when you're coming home. And I'm not saying all Vietnam veterans were being mistreated, you know, but it's truth that some were, you know, a good amount were, too many were. And by telling that story and sharing their pain, I wanted that to be part of that hero's journey, that when they go there and they're initiated by that design, that unconventional design of landscape architecture and the beauty of the black granite, seeing those names in the wall, seeing that rift in the earth, how peaceful it is, yet how much of a humble reminder of the cost of citizenship, that you'll be able to see how that memorial helped a healing process for them, for that pain. So,
you know, it was really interesting. I thought it made me reflect. When we're young, we're so certain we're right, and I sort of put myself back in that time period and thought, well, what if I were a college student at that moment in time, and I felt you know, deeply disturbed by the war. and I protested against it. And then would I have been the right kind of person to understand my protest against the war and not my protest against those who were serving in the war, and whether or not I would have treated people rightly. And it sort of brings everything into perspective in our times today, I think, just watching your film, in that we can, perhaps we ought to take measure of ourselves, the certainty we have with our certain political perspectives, but making sure that we are considering in our perspectives what brings people to the other side of the conversation. So I thought it was just, watching your film at this moment in time, I think really was quite moving.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Chris, another question for you. Your film is obviously a major accomplishment for a graduate student. And I'm going to ask you, looking back, is there anything that you would do differently in the film?
Yes, besides like specific graphics and stuff, the graphics aren't exactly, I work with some of the best graphic designers in the industry nowadays. And there are certain things that I might have cleaned up here or there, but I think the biggest thing is, at the very end, I called it the Vietnam conflict because somebody asked me to. And I really wish that I would have called it the Vietnam War at the end. And the thing is I don't know what's the right answer, but it was a war, And so I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Just a word choice, a different word choice.
Yeah. The Korean conflict kind of started that, police action as opposed to war. I don't know.
Jan, you mentioned earlier that in your mind's eye, you thought this memorial would be something different than it actually turned out to be. And I'm sure, I've seen Maya Lin's materials that she used to present her idea. So that began to tell a story that it was going to be a little bit different. But, your first time going there, maybe during construction or after completion, can you just share with us how you mentally got from where you were in your preconceived conception of what that memorial might ultimately look like, and then the journey through the competition and a different kind of approach, and then you're there at the real site. And maybe just a little bit about your own personal reaction, how it affected you.
Yes, I can address that. Essentially, this was going to be a special place. It is now 1982, the summer of 1982. The opponents of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial were attempting to have our construction permit withdrawn and to just stop all construction until they got final approval for different statues and different, this was a big high stakes game. So I have a little public relations experience, or I sort of learned as quickly as I could. So the idea was to finish the first panel and put it on the memorial. We got the panel done. It was done in Tennessee, shipped up to Washington. We installed it. And that's when, there's a big concrete wall behind the memorial. We had one panel, and we had found some local people who lost their sons fighting. And this was so beautifully magnificent. It brought about such extraordinary emotion from the parents of these casualties. And everybody saw that this stone is fantastically beautiful. By the way, when you see the Iwo Jima Memorial, the Marine Memorial, it's the same stone, but their stone is from Sweden. We didn't get it from Sweden. You know why? Because our opponents would say, wait a minute, that's where the anti-war protesters went. And the opponents also made the charge that a member of our jury, Garrett Ekbo, had been involved with the American Communist Party. Well, he actually taught landscape architecture at Berkeley, and maybe that's close enough. I don't know. It was this was the kind of bricks they were throwing through our window and just driving us insane. It was just scary how determined these people were, but the legacy, the narrative, who would control the societal narrative of the Vietnam War, that was worth putting a stake through someone's heart. Unfortunately, it was my heart.
Not good. You, Jan, I know have brought some pictures that you wanted to share with everybody, and maybe we can bring them up. I think our producers might have them at the ready.
Yes, very amazing producers. Yes,
they are amazing producers.
Okay, our first picture is just kind of a rainy day at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and the people in the yellow hats, they do such great work there. But that shows how when you visit the memorial, you're not only at the Vietnam Memorial, but you're at the Washington Monument, you're at the Lincoln Memorial, you're part of the nation's history. Next. And, you know, young people, they know nothing about the Vietnam War, and but they come, usually on a normal day, if there are 1,000 people there, you'll probably see 2 Vietnam veterans, and you know, 75% of the people are under the age of 14, and the memorial's been there for 35 years. So, but just a picture to talking to some school kids. Next. Now we get into the meat of the issue. The memorial is a place where the dead and the living commune. Here's a gentleman, says, in memory of the dark horse fallen heroes, Troop D, 4th Cavalry Battalion and 1st Infantry Division, and it has the names of all these guys, and it has the Purple Heart mounted on this patch. That's the 1st Division patch. Next. This is a veteran who was shot by a sniper, a Yemeni from Yemen, and when he was in Iraq, and his entire face was kind of ripped off almost by this thing. But over the years, he's gotten better looking, got a law degree, and he now works for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He's a great guy. Constantine's his last name. Fantastic fellow. Next. Now this is, I want you to think about this. This is from a young man who left it because his father can't mentally come to the memorial. Now you see this canteen, you see the red stuff on the side. The red stuff is blood that was shed by a North Vietnamese soldier in, I think, 1967. And here's what he says. Taken from a North Vietnamese soldier during the Battle of Hill 875, November 23rd, 1967. My father was there. I'm leaving this at the wall to honor him. This battle still was hell on earth. And I hope that by leaving this at this great memorial, this gives my father some promise. Thank you, veterans, for serving our country. So very dramatic. Why would he leave it there? Well, this is where the spirit of many American Vietnam veterans is. This is where they want to go. This is their Vatican. This is their Mecca. This is their place they have to go to. But his father could not go there, and he's not alone. Next. Yeah, again, this was actually left by a guy who I talked to him for a few minutes, and he was in Iraq, and this is 82nd Airborne. That's the patch AA called All American, and infantry blue. That's the combat infantry badge, which you get as an infantryman after you go in combat. You have to be under enemy fire several times, and so I have that medal. Next. Dear Mr. Aguilar, my name is Jackson Fox, and I'm here to thank you for serving our country. I'm sorry the enemy shot you, because if I was there, I would have tried to save you. I would take the bullet for you. I'm sorry you died. And I can tell your family is proud of you. I think the United States of America is very proud of what you did and how you served the country. I hope God watches over you forever and be proud of what you did, because I am. Thank you very much. Your friend, Louis Fox. What is this? I mean, it might be some random thing he did. Maybe he knows the family, probably not, but it's very moving. I mean, he just, you ever told somebody, look, if push comes to shove, I'll take the bullet for you. You ever done that? Well, he was willing to, and I have seen people do that, and I've kind of done it myself a couple of times in combat. Next. So, every year when I used to run the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, we would leave a Christmas tree at the Vietnam Wall, and we'd get the Joint Chiefs of Staff would send us a 3-star, 4-star general or senior military person, and they would take a picture of this and send it off to Army Times and Stars and Stripes. So the guys back home, they're going on some patrol in Afghanistan. At least they would know that the people back home think about them. And when I left there in 2014, they ended that program. But anyway, it was very nice and very meaningful. And from time to time, we would hear back from these guys. This is Army Sergeant Mike Campbell, and he's from Paducah, Kentucky. Next. That may be the final one, actually.
I think that was the last one.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Well, let me just ask one last question before I open the floor up, and I see we do have some questions coming from our audience. Jen, let me just ask you this one question. What to you, as I understand, thousands upon thousands of articles are left at the memorial and are now collected and archived and stored. But what one item that you know about has moved you the most?
Well, there's a little story here, and there's some tragedy, but it has a happy ending. A fellow contacted me, and he said, I left a picture at the memorial. And he says, the picture is of somebody I killed, a North Vietnamese soldier. He and I came face to face with each other on a patrol, and he fumbled with his rifle. He couldn't kill me. He could not make himself kill me. I killed him. When you go to the body, maybe there's some maps or some information, and here's a picture of him with his 2 daughters, one sitting on each little knee, and he says, I have to meet these children because I killed their father, and I want to apologize. So I knew the Vietnamese ambassador of Washington. I was a little bit of a celebrity in Vietnam because I was in charge of removing a bunch of landmines, and I was unexploded ordnance that we left over there. So he seized it as a public relations opportunity, put the picture in the Hanoi newspaper, and the guy who was killed lived just a couple miles from the central downtown Hanoi, and he flew to Vietnam, ashamed of himself, and asked for their forgiveness, and they gave it to him. The Vietnamese are a very fascinating culture, and these are really good people. They believe also in ancestor worship, and having karma, all that. So that was the most moving thing, and I personally got involved in it, and I still get the shakes thinking about it. Happy ending, though.
Yeah, just amazing. Well, I'm going to pose a few questions that have come in from our audience. And Chris, this first one is for you, and I'm just going to read it. One of the most interesting parts of the documentary was hearing how the veterans received the concept and design of the wall. Some mentioning that they were against the original design, but ultimately came to find it as a place for healing with many veterans returning again and again. How was the experience for Chris meeting the veterans?
I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but it was very cathartic, quite like the memorial, and it's just interesting to just see different people and hear their stories. You know, it's not all just about pain, but it's about getting to know them too. And I think that's why, you know, my grandfather fought in the Korean War, and so I had no ties to the Vietnam War at all. Just through this class and this project and some ambition, and I saw a story and I said, yeah, but I really tried to dig deep. And there are a lot of things that I didn't show in the documentary just because I didn't feel like it was appropriate as far as showcasing their emotions or anything like that. But I wanted to show enough that I felt was necessary to tell their story and to build up that story arc. But it was quite remarkable, really, to get to know somebody. And one thing I did want to say, and I think I can tie this into this, is I think it's very important that my generation, I'm a millennial. I'm kind of an unconventional millennial, I must say, but not really fit the bill too much. Nothing against millennials, but you know, but I will say this, like, I want to make sure that generations moving forward can be able to take a part of the past and try and understand that and know the importance of it, and try and understand generations of the past and stuff. Basically, what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I'm fumbling over my words here, but basically, yeah, I think it's really important because history is a part of us, whether you were there or not. And I think it's crucial that people engage. So
I think the storytelling component of this is so incredibly important. You know, we're now at a point where there is many decades of perspective that can be entered into how people responded to your questions and spoke on film, but that'll be there to be consumed and understood for decades to come as well. You know, when we do these digitizations, when we put people's discussions to film, especially these days, it's something that can be preserved forever. It's almost capturing a moment in time. So it's a real treasure that you did. Here's another question. There are many memorials in France to those lost whose bodies were never found. Thiepval is an example. They all use the same idea of listing all the names on stone. Most are arches or neoclassical in design. If you could, please comment on whether these memorials influence the wall's design, and also, do you believe they've served the same healing function?
I think they did serve and did serve the healing function, because it was really for the veterans. This was a big battle during the Somme offensive in World War I, and the British Army lost 75,000 dead in I think an 8, 10, 12-day period, which is a mass. You know, it was this fighting was industrial scale fighting for the first time in history, with machine guns that were very accurate and snipers, all this sort of thing. And so it probably helped a lot. But, you know, the names are kind of so high up there, you can't really reach them in Thiepval. But I do know for a fact that Maya Lin had visited Thiepval. She had seen it before. But the fact is, all of the participants had to find a way to engrave the names on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. But yes, fantastic. In France, I recently went there and did some of the D-Day tour. In all the little towns in France, when you go to there, have statues of the soldier in World War I uniform. It's kind of like World War I is still commemorated in the middle of these squares. And many of these, they look like, most of these statues look like they were pretty old, like maybe kind of like right at before World War II started is when they put them there. But it's quite an exciting place, and the French really have the touch when they do anything. With art. I mean, Paris is not the friendliest people in the world, but it is a beautiful city.
Absolutely. Jan, I think this question is for you. Talking about the rationale for the U.S. being in that war. The question is, what was the understanding of the soldiers? What was told to you as an infantryman as you went off into that war as to why you were going?
We were under orders to do what we were told. The Army did not make a concerted effort to explain to us that this is a war to contain communism, to stop it from spreading to other countries, to Thailand and Laos and so forth. And eventually they're going to end up in Hawaii and India, and the whole world's going to be communist. That's kind of what a lot of people believed.
Mm-hmm.
That's what LBJ, you should see the LBJ, a little movie, a propaganda movie in which it starts with Nazi soldiers walking down the street and drums. And he says, "Is this what we want for the people of Vietnam? They have to fight, and we need to help them fight." And everybody was behind it at first, but it became the most divisive event of the 20th century. Victory was not to be had.
I'm going to ask one last question, and it is this. Can you elaborate on the later addition of the two figural memorials, Three Soldiers and the Women's Memorial? And do you think these reinforce or take away from the contemplative, cathartic nature of the abstract memorial?
Well, that's a great question. And I do know the answer to that. The Vietnam Women's Memorial is sort of behind the tree line. So it doesn't have direct contact with it. But when your tour groups go there, if I'm going to meet some school kids, I'll show them the wall and the statue of the three servicemen. And then I'll take them there, and I can just stand right there on the little pedestal where the women are attending the wounded Marine. And it's it's a wonderful place that provides some privacy, and it's good to talk to small groups. The Three Servicemen Memorial, there's an artistic tension between them, these guys looking at this wall, and you say to yourself, I wonder if they're saying, is our name going to be on that memorial? So it's very dramatic, and it does work very nicely. And credit goes to Frederick Hart, the sculptor, for being big enough to remove it from the memorial, but coming up with an architectural and artistic solution that is very satisfying to the visitors.
Great. I am going to ask one last question, and it just came in, and I love the question because we always like to hear what young, talented people are up to. But one of our audience asked Chris, what are you doing now? Can you just give us a brief?
I was actually typing that out, but I have no problem saying it. Yeah, so I'm a creative broadcast producer at Amazon, but actually more primarily it's Ring. So you've heard of Ring video doorbells, but it's Ring home security pretty much now, because we do all kinds of different, we have an alarm system, we have everything. It's a great product. And basically, so I do all the commercials for them, and pretty much all of them. And I also do commercials for Amazon Key and Amazon Eero, which is a Wi-Fi router around your home. So yeah, I stay pretty busy with commercials, but I plan on doing documentaries in a few years. I just need to build up a little more money on my own here. We just bought a house in Los Angeles, so
that set you back.
Don't ever buy a home in Los Angeles. Just saying.
Not in Indiana anymore.
Not in Indiana anymore. Yeah.
No, you're not.
So, but yeah. So that's what I do. I work on the ring commercials. So
Great.
it's a lot of fun.
Well, you both are just tours de force, and I hope you both keep doing all the great things that you're doing, both young and a little bit less young, but that's all right, right? We keep doing what we need to do. Thank you so much, both of you, for being with us tonight. It's been a fantastic conversation. Love the film. The documentary is just outstanding, and the way the story was told. And Jan, understanding your story is one of the key treats of the documentary, understanding how this was sort of brought through almost against all odds and successfully constructed. And it's a miracle, and it's loaded with impact. So thank you both for being with us tonight. Thank you to Laura Fogarty and Lauren Green, our producers, and thank you to all of you out in the audience, our loyal supporters of the museum, for joining us tonight. Hope all are well, and see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.